All right, we continue our conversations with members of Congress from North Carolina this week about the issues they're facing when Congress returns to Washington next week. Tonight we're joined by Congressman Mark Walker, a Republican representing the 6th District, and his wife Kelly, who's a nurse practitioner and flight trauma specialist at Wake Forest Baptist Medical Center. Good to see you both. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. Kel, I want to start with you.
Okay.
What's it like going from being a pastor's wife to the spouse of a member of Congress? I imagine it's a little bit different.
It was good preparation. I really enjoy being his wife. He's very talented and works very hard. I think ministry prepared us in many ways. The primary way that it prepared us is that it's still a job of service for the community. So, you know, it's a schedule that is often rigorous and, you know, cuts into our family time. But it's from a perspective and a heart of service, and he does.
But the members of congregation probably speak to you differently than some, perhaps, opponents of your husband. Have you gotten used to that yet?
Yes, I let it roll off. I don't scare that easy, so I just kind of take it in stride.
One last question before we get to Representative Walker, too. Obviously, there was the shooting with Representative Scalise. What was that like? And he was supposed to pitch, and you were at practice that day. What was that like, those moments of waiting and understanding and hearing what was going on for you?
Well, he called me that morning, and the first thing he said was, "I just need to let you know that I'm okay." So I knew that what followed that was not going to be very good. But my initial reaction to that was, I want to be there. I want to see what I can do to help. You know, from a emergency nurse and now nurse practitioner perspective, I wanted to be able to help those guys in some way. And I think he responded very similarly in that he, you know, as a pastor for so many years, he went into pastoral mode, making sure that his colleagues and everybody were okay. And I think it took a day or two before it really kind of sunk in what that was all about.
I'm not used to getting a lot of love during trauma incidences. In fact, being married to an ER nurse for all those years, unless something was literally hanging off, we're not going to get a lot of love. But fortunately, I had left the field that day, and after pitching some, and so it was certainly a tragic time, and really kind of revealed some of the rhetoric and where we are, and a reminder that all of us in leadership have some responsibility in the terminology and tone that we share our principles and our values.
All right, let's. I need to get some policy with you real quick.
Yep.
Debt ceiling, that's coming up at the end of next month. That's going to be one of the big things. I've read that you want a clean deal. Or you don't want a clean deal, excuse me. You don't want a clean deal. You want some sort of cuts attached to it. Why put the default at risk by doing that?
A great question, Tim. And one of the reasons that we're asking for at least some kind of reform attached to the debt ceiling is that now for 6 or 7 years in a row, it's the same song and dance. Hey, we've got to raise the debt ceiling because we're worried about the credit rating, can't default. We get all that. The debt ceiling, obviously, since it's paying for things that's bills that have already been spent, we understand that. However, right now we're leaving $145,000 of debt per household right now. What will it be next year or the year after? So at some point we have to, as members of Congress who have said we're going there to be fiscally responsible, at some point we've got to bend that bell curve back. And we think it's reasonable, when being asked to raise the debt ceiling, that we put some kind of reform to it. Not overnight, but some long-term, bend it back a little bit, because right now we're out of control in our mandatory spending, and we need to get our fiscal house in order.
But are you willing to put the default at risk if something can't get passed by the deadline?
No, we have not put any kind of red line out there and said, if you don't do this, then we're doing this. What we're doing is asking that after this many years, that let's at least begin to attach some kind of long-term reform that most of the House Republicans would agree on that needs to happen through Congress if we're going to raise the debt ceiling, instead of just doing a clean debt limit. In fact, the Treasury Secretary met with the RSC about 3 months ago asking for a clean debt ceiling, and it actually fell flat. Several of our members spoke out and said, we're considering raising it, but let's put a long-term reform attached to it.
You know, if I'm sitting at home and I'm not in politics, I'm saying, why can't they handle these things two separately? Why do you have to put risk or poison pill on one thing and not, why can't these things get done separately?
I think because for so many years, people have gone to Congress and they've promised that we're going to do a balanced budget or get the fiscal part of this in order. Yet over the last 10 years, we've gone from $11 trillion to almost $20 trillion in debt. We're going to get a $700 billion deficit again this past year. If you're going to say, listen, We need to make sure that we're thinking or being good stewards of the taxpayers' dollars, yet we're not following up, our actions aren't meeting our words. I think it's something that we need to take a long look at. That's what I ran on. And for me to fulfill those promises, I have to continue to beat this drum that we're not being fiscally responsible.
Okay, sit tight. We got to take a short break, but much more with the Walker family when we return right after this break. Welcome back. We continue our conversations with Congressman Mark Walker and his wife Kelly. Again, thank you so much for joining us tonight and sticking with us. Kelly, you're a healthcare provider. Do you have strong opinions on all this healthcare reform stuff? Do you nudge Representative Walker at night and tell him things at all, or do you just stick to providing the healthcare?
We never talk about policy. We have such little time to talk. It's typically about family things. I get my 10-minute phone call at night at the end of a busy day, but I will tell you from a provider perspective, it's frustrating to wade into the weeds with that, because as clinicians, we are very passionate about just taking care of people and making sure they have the best health care possible, and just anything that takes the time away from the patient is a frustration. Time on the computer, all the regulations, the paperwork that has to be done, all of that's a frustration.
Resolution, is that something you'd like to see,
Yes.
regardless of what it is?
Yes.
Representative Walker, the CSR, the cost sharing reduction, the subsidies, this seems to be on a month-by-month process here. Sure. What should we do about these? I mean, does there need to at least be, regardless of what happens, some sort of decision made more than month to month? I mean, to me, when I talk to healthcare insurers and providers, that's what's really frustrating to them right now, more than the issue itself.
Yeah, and we've seen that in several arenas, whether it be transportation, whatever. In order for whether it's insurance companies or providers or whoever to make any kind of a long-range business model or forecasting, they do need some long-term resolutions. But the CSR is a very tough issue, because this is something that our courts have already ruled as unconstitutional. Listen, we can understand that this is a temporary solution or an arrangement, but long-term, to be able to be in a position where these payments are directly made to what some would consider bailing out insurance companies, it's not our job. And I feel like that we've got to make sure that that gets taken care of. Of course, that goes into the larger context of this hold and repeal placement of the ACA or Obamacare that's been going literally since the inauguration, January the 20th. This is something that I hope that we haven't given up, and I believe it's going to stay part of the conversation, because each time there's a major insurance company that pulls out, or there's another section of a state or counties that have no providers, I think it's going to stay very much a prominent part of our conversation.
At the same time, the CBO said if these CSRs are removed, it could increase premiums by 20% next year. Should they stay in place until there's some sort of resolution?
I think our guys, the people that represent the Republicans in the wing, are okay with some kind of temporary solution. But as far as writing this off as long-term, I think we'd have a problem with it, because not only are they extremely costly, but like I said, take the legislative component out of it. This is something that the judicial branch has already said this is not constitutional.
We have a couple minutes left, but tax reform, the president's unveiling his newest plan today, or updated plan. How does this get done with healthcare not getting done? And I keep hearing it's going to be harder than healthcare.
Well, I know there's been some kind of working agreement between the House, the Senate, as well as the White House. Kevin Brady, the chairman of the Ways and Means, has been working on this for the entire year, even though we were working through the healthcare components as well. I believe there's a framework, not to get too much in the weeds, but the border adjustment tax has been removed from it, which we believe will make it easier. We do have a little bit of an issue, because there's $980 billion worth of Obamacare taxes that were going to be part of the reforms. So we want to make sure this is still a reform, not just tax cuts. However, it's been 31 years since we've had any kind of major reforms. The tax code is now 75,000 pages long. It's time. This is if you want to use the word bipartisan, this is something that both Democrats and Republicans should be able to get behind.
Is there an urgency to get something done in the next 2 months?
It's going to be crucial. Part of the grade of the 115th Congress will be what we get done over the next 60 to 90 days. And there are 43 bills that have passed out of the House, the Senate, and have been signed into law: regulatory relief, human trafficking, some great things on veterans. But Republicans made a promise, two promises, that we would work on health care and tax reform. And if we don't get some of those things done, specifically tax reform and eventually health care, I think we will be judged by that.
Just on a personal level, did you ever think your husband would be up in Washington talking to the president and the vice president of the United States on a somewhat regular basis?
No, I didn't.
Want to expound on that?
Are you ready for another campaign? That might be the better question.
I guess so, yeah.
What's it like for you? You have children, right? I mean,
Yes.
what's it like, the adjustment to that? Now, as a pastor, you go out in the middle of the night and things too, but
The two older children have been a little indifferent, but the younger one is very engaged. She really enjoys meeting people and going to events with us. So it's been fun.
there's a lot to learn from.
Yeah, there is. Thank you, Jay.
Good to see you both. Thank you so much. I appreciate it, and welcome to our students. I enjoyed it. Time for one more break. When we return, we'll get our advocates' take on the big political issues of the week, including those political maps. Stay with us.